Chapter 12 has a ton of information that is important, focusing on agriculture, or food, soil, and pest management. But we have good comparison of industrialized and organic agriculture on the case study, and these will come up quite frequently throughout. So the first section is kind of about what do people actually need when we talk about food security. So we can divide our nutrients into two general categories. Macronutrients, those are the carbohydrates, lipids, proteins, the things that provide you energy that you need a lot of. And then micronutrients, the vitamins and minerals that you need small amounts of. And then two other terms which you might hear are undernourished and malnourished. If you're undernourished, it means you're not getting enough calories, not enough energy. If you are malnourished, think mal, bad, right? So you're missing a specific micronutrient or oftentimes protein in a lot of areas that are undergoing famine. Protein will be missing quite often. So some examples of things that can result from malnourishment. If you're missing vitamin A, that can lead to childhood blindness. Vitamin C can lead to scurvy. So that's something associated with pirates because they were like out in the sea, the ocean sea, not vitamin C, and they didn't get enough fruits and vegetables, so they had scurvy. Something that can result from a lack of protein is kwashiorkor. Vitamin D and or calcium can lead to rickets. A lack of iron can lead to anemia. A lack of iodine can lead to goiters. So a lot of different examples of things that might show up. The two major problems that we have in the world when it comes to food is undernutrition, and when you have mass scales of undernutrition in areas, that can lead to famine. And then an equal number of people are dealing from overnutrition and obesity, which can lower life expectancy and decrease the quality of life. All right, so how is our food actually produced? So about 40% of Earth's land is used for food. Of that, 11% is cropland, which provides about 77% of the food. And then 29% of that land is used for rangelands, pastures, and feedlots. And that only provides 16% of our food. So you can think about the second law of thermodynamics coming into play there. And then where's the rest of our food come from? About 7% comes from fisheries and aquaculture. 14 plant species provide 90% of our food calories, and 48% of all that is rice, wheat, and corn. So those are our three major crops. Industrialized agriculture is what you think of when you think of these like massive, large-scale farms. So they're using heavy equipment. Lots of money is going into the farm. Get a high input of fertilizers, pesticides, water. Usually we have monoculture, so all one crop. So picture driving through, Iowa, and it's like cornfield, 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 and then soybean field, and then cornfield, 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 etc. In plantations, which we usually see in tropical countries, plantations are usually used to grow cash crops that are then exported to more developed countries, like, palm oil and sugar cane, things like that. Other ways we can grow food is through greenhouses and hydroponics, so just without using soil and using water only, a nutrient-rich water. And there's also aquaponics, like our aquaponics system in the classroom, where you're using that fish waste, so there's less need for nutrients because the fish waste provides that. And then you can eat the fish as well. Not our fish, though. In contrast to industrialized agriculture, we have subsistence agriculture, which tends to be a very low input, so low input of pesticides, fertilizers, water, etc. And it's polyculture, so growing lots of different crops, oftentimes using a slash and burn method. This can produce higher yields than intensive agriculture, so that's something to think about. There have been kind of two phases of a green revolution. Basically, this has allowed food production to increase greatly. Started in the middle of the 20th century in kind of our developed countries, and then there was a second green revolution, like the 70s, 80s in the developing world. But basically, the result of using lots of monocultures, either selectively bred or genetically modified to grow better, greatly increasing water and fertilizers and pesticides, and then doing something called multiple cropping. So using the land repeatedly for lots of different crops. All right, we've got a little bit of information here on page 284 about soil. Pay attention. This is super important. There's not a ton of stuff in your book about soil, but we will supplement this. But you definitely need to know this information about what makes up soil and the different horizons or layers in the soil. So don't skip that science focus box. All right, so in the United States, we are pretty lucky when it comes to food. We have a very efficient agriculture system, and we have a pretty solid income compared to a lot of places. Our GDP is pretty high, so we only spend about 10% of our income on food, whereas the poorest billions of people spend about 70% of their income, and their income is usually less than $2.25 a day, but they're spending 70% of their income on food. So 10% sounds pretty good here, and that's a lot lower than it used to be. There are hidden costs to our cheap food, like there are taxes that go into agricultural subsidies, and then pollution and health problems that result from all of that. And then we get into crossbreeding, artificial selection, a little bit of genetically modified stuff, meat production. So global meat production is increasing. It's expected to increase as people kind of as populations move through the demographic transition and people want to eat more meat. About 50% of our meat comes from grazing and pasture, and then the other 50% comes from factory farms or feedlots and CAFOs, or concentrated animal feeding operations. So we can see a feedlot in figure 12.8 showing what's going on there. And then another way that we get our food is through all of our fishing, right? So our fisheries and aquaculture. So remember, fisheries occur naturally, so they're areas where there's a concentration of a desirable species in either an ocean or a lake, and then aquaculture is farmed fish. Those can be either in freshwater ponds or cages in the ocean. We are seeing an increase in the carnivorous aquatic species being used in aquaculture. So again, second law of thermodynamics, that's not going to be as efficient. And all of this way that we get our food means that about 9, maybe 10% of greenhouse gas emissions come from agriculture. So with the way that we are obtaining food right now, for every 1 unit of food energy, we need to put in about 10 units of fossil fuel energy. So that's something we could definitely work on. All right, so what happens? Section 12.3, super important. Please pay attention to it. The box, figure 12.10, that shows the natural capital degradation and kind of gives you broad categories about biodiversity loss, soil, water, air pollution, and human health. Look through those, make sure you can describe them, and basically the rest of this section does that. So it talks about soil erosion, and also desertification and soil salinization and air pollution, biodiversity loss, all of this stuff. So I'm kind of flying through it, but I want you to spend your time on 12.3 because it's got some important stuff there. And we have some nice trade-offs as well with genetically modified foods, which we'll talk about more, animal feedlots, and then aquaculture. Okay, so I flew through 12.3, but I want you to take your time on 12.3. The next section, section 4, deals with pests. So one of the things that decreases our food supply is pests that eat the food. So what can we do about this? So one thing we can use is pesticides. So pesticides could be anything like insecticides, herbicides, fungicides, or rodenticides. So they kill what the name says. And there's a great story here about DDT. And this Individuals Matter box, I want you to read this one on Rachel Carson and Silent Spring. I know I've brought her up before in class, but get a little more information there. Pesticides generally can be either natural, those are sometimes called biopesticides, so things that are, because evolution, it's amazing, but a lot of plants, animals, etc. have their own pesticides they make to protect themselves, to help them survive and reproduce. Then there are also the ones that are synthetic or made in the lab, like DDT. DDT was the first one. And a lot of those synthetic pesticides are very broad spectrum, so that means they'll kill a lot of different things, and they're persistent, so they don't break down. Okay, so we have some nice trade-offs kind of summarized, and then a detailed pros and cons of synthetic pesticides on pages 299 and 300. And then there's a great classic case study There's even a children's book called The Day They Parachuted Cats onto Borneo, all about some unintended consequences of the use of pesticides. There are laws relating to pesticide use. There's FIFRA, or the Federal Insecticide, Fungicide, and Rodenticide Act, which helps to regulate the sale and use of pesticides. It is underfunded, so most of the ingredients have not actually been studied for health effects. Then there's the Food Quality Protection Act, which reduces the amount of pesticides that are allowed if we don't know the effects of on children. So it's inconclusive, and they cut back on that. So let's protect our kids. Great alternative is IPM, or Integrated Pest Management. There's some other alternatives here, but Integrated Pest Management basically uses physical or cultivation techniques and biological controls first, like natural predators or parasites, and then chemical control. And it tends to be very a narrow spectrum, targeted pesticide use. So IPM can reduce pesticide use, water pollution, reduce the need for fertilizer and irrigation. Over the long run, it can reduce cost, decreases genetic resistance to pesticides, but it does require a lot of knowledge for pests. All right, we can improve food security. So I talk about subsidies, controlling prices, and then kind of our general catch-all, reducing population growth and reducing poverty, etc. So don't skip section 5, but read it. And then 12.6, the last section here, talks about what can we do to actually increase the sustainability of our agricultural systems. So for soil conservation, we have the idea, and we have nice pictures here of terracing, contour planting or contour plowing, strip cropping using a cover crop, alley cropping, wind breaks, and then also no-till and low-till farming. Good case study on the Dust Bowl, which you've probably talked about in history class, and maybe you've had to read the Grapes of Wrath in English. The Dust Bowl led to the Soil Erosion Act, which eventually gave us the Natural Resources Conservation Service. And then we also have the Farm Act. And basically what these things do is they provide subsidies and training for farmers to farm more sustainably. Farm Act specifically provides subsidies to not farm land that could easily erode, all to prevent soil erosion. We can also restore soil fertility. So this is using fertilizers. We can use organic fertilizers, animal manure, green or plant manure, compost, or synthetic fertilizers or inorganic, which usually have nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium. Those are the 3 limiting factors in soil, so those are the nutrients that are provided. You can also use crop rotation with legumes. So think back to the nitrogen cycle and all those great things legumes do. Okay, and then 12.6, important, talks about how we can reduce soil salinizations using solutions in figure 1231, do more sustainable aquaculture, and then the idea of producing meat more efficiently or eating less meat or eating different types of meat can have a huge impact on things. Red meat requires a lot more energy. And then the rest of this section kind of focuses on organic and sustainable agriculture. So definitely read this, and we will be talking more about this in class. And then, of course, the local food movement, which is gaining ground, and reducing food waste is also really important. So if you think about how much food you throw out on a weekly basis, if we can reduce that, that will be beneficial. And that is a really quick overview of Chapter 12.